With the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles, and today I'm having a chat with Remi Piet, who is Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. Thank you for joining me, Remi.
It's my pleasure, Scott, as always.
And so it's been a short while since we last had a chat. In the meantime, you've recently been down in South Africa. You've been attending the mining indaba that was held there earlier this year. Can you just start us off with a little bit of an explainer of what you were doing there and what were your takeaway thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been encouraged by several of our partners operating in Latin America to start having many more engagements in Africa. So we actually launched Africa Market Intelligence late last year. So we have now two companies, one geared at the Americas and the other one geared at towards mining projects in Africa. And so it was the opportunity to go to Indaba. I was welcome to speak at a couple of panels, especially on best practices in sustainable minings and community engagements. And I was, to be very clear, I mean, this was a very successful event from all attendees. Indaba has really positioned itself as the number one event for mining in Africa, and more delegates tend to attend. There was, compared to previous years, there was even more a focus on above the ground risks, which confirms the fact that the mining sector has now fully engaged in developing successful strategies towards engaging with communities with above the ground risks such as economic, social, operational, reputational risks. What we've seen at IMARC last year, or at Mines and Money, or 121, or all large conferences, is also confirmed on the African continent. And Indaba was extremely successful from having not only experts talking about best case practices and trying to showcase how some approach could be replicated under a specific in specific jurisdiction, but also you had key leader of mining companies from Mike Bristow to Kelvin Dushnitsky to all leaders of large mining companies that have pledged to understanding this as one of the main focus of future operations in the continent.
Oh, well, that's pretty fantastic. So then we would be able to talk about Africa issues at the same level of depth as what you can talk about Latin American issues going forward.
Absolutely, I'm going to have plenty of opportunities for further chats with you, my dear Scott.
Fantastic. Well, then we'll have to put a bookmark on that and hope to come back to it sometime soon. But for now, we're going to focus on Latin American politics. So, in the last few weeks, there's been some news out of Brazil. Its President Jair Bolsonaro has moved forward on allowing mining on indigenous lands. Now, this is one of those hot button subjects which tends to get people from around the world fired up. What can you tell me about what the government has allowed and what's going to be the fallout of a far right president who's known for being quite he doesn't seem to have the best relationship with the indigenous people in Brazil, and now he's allowing mining on their lands. I mean, what's going to be the result of this?
So this is something that was expected for several months now, and definitely the position of Bolsonaro in Brazil towards indigenous communities has nothing to do with the traditional position of Brazilian presidents, whether you were looking at PT leader from Lula or Dilma Rousseff, or even before when we were looking at previous administration that were more center right. There was a clear understanding that the indigenous communities had a right to live on lands that were historically under their control, or where they had actually settled. Bolsonaro, as from the very first days of his administration, clarified the fact that he believed that indigenous communities had too much rights and too much space and territory on which they operated, and that actually should be um, placed into lands that could be explored for either not only mining activity, by the way, it's also oil and gas exploration, cattle ranching, agribusiness, dam projects, tourism. So it's really an opening up of former and traditional indigenous reserves to economic development in Brazil. The key issue here is that inside the bill that is meant to be submitted to Congress, although it's not sure it will be actually supported by Congress as of today. We can actually go into the details on this. But the bills say that the indigenous communities would actually be consulted, but there will be no veto rights, apart from cases where we're talking about wildcat mining or garimpeiros, So clearly, an engagement from illegal organizations in the mining sector. So that means that the indigenous communities will not have the capacity to have a strong stance in favor or against the project, most likely against the project. And we're looking at an intensification of deforestation, or more than anything, also a bad signal in terms of opening lands for mining organizations that sometimes are not the most professionals. And when I say mining, it's also, I could say the same thing about agribusiness or cattle ranching. So we're looking here at a strong possibility that if this bill is actually being accepted, in the midterm, you will have projects that will try to take a ground in some traditional lands, looking at traditional indigenous lands, looking at potential unrest and conflict and violence around these projects. But even before that, we've seen over the last 2 years a rise of conflicts from garimpeiros, from illegal miners. We're talking about more than 100 occasions per year of conflict between indigenous communities and illegal miners that have led to already several deaths in 2020. So there's a strong rise of conflicts around those areas and those lands that are protected by the Brazilian constitutions today, especially when you look at the fact that Brazil is actually a signatory of the ILO Convention 169 that actually demands a consultation and an approbation from communities before projects actually happen. But what I'm saying here is that we will see intense conflicts. There could have been a way of working, more, let's say, incrementally towards opening additional lands for exploration if it had been done with, clear consultation from the get-go with different indigenous communities. But Bolsonaro has taken the decision to legislate on this issue and being extremely, let's say, aggressive towards giving the get-go for especially the cattle ranching and agribusiness projects to be able to explore and operate on traditional indigenous lands.
And so, what would Brazil be getting out of this? I mean, is the payoff worth the conflict that would flare up from this? I suppose what I'm asking is like, how much land is Bolsonaro hoping to open up, and is it really worth the trouble?
No, I mean, we're looking today at very large, territory that are right now administered by indigenous communities, or at least are blocked for any kind of exploration or economic activity. So what Bolsonaro is obviously looking at is to try to get additional economic development. He's been, strongly supported even during the campaign. He's been supported by the agribusiness lobby and all the representative in Congress that are being funded by cattle ranching and other similar activities that need deforestation to be able to prosper. And so what he's aiming at is both an economic return for development of the country, but also political gain and political support to the traditional supporters of his policies. And this is just one new element to a series of decisions from Bolsonaro. That one of a very strong one actually was the removal of the head of FUNAI. So FUNAI is this ministerial organization that is in charge of indigenous rights in Brazil. And traditionally, the head of FUNAI is either an academic or someone that has very strong roots or knowledge of the indigenous communities. And he has actually replaced it by an evangelist that has a very strong and antagonistic view to the right of indigenous communities on their land. So we're looking here at another, let's say, domino towards the development of extractive industries, but more likely even more agribusiness and strong deforestation in regions where that traditionally were actually left, in pristine conditions. When you listen to the new head of FUNAI, Ricardo Lopez Diaz, and his views towards indigenous communities, he actually believes that indigenous should actually, mix with Brazilian tradition, and that they should not have any kind of specific rights over lands. And we're even talking about some communities that as of today still have had no contact with modernity, and so therefore are by a series of United Nations regulations and ILO regulations are supposed to be extremely protected from industrial developments. My point here, just to clarify, is that there were very large lands that were operated or administered under the rules of indigenous community rights. Some of those lands could have actually been, renegotiated, and especially in case of potential strong developments and strong, return both for the country or the community itself. But instead of doing this and having a step-by-step approach or bottom-up approach, Bolsonaro has followed his doctrine of being extremely strong-minded against what is considered to be the indigenous slash left-wing slash academic positions of protected lands that is not to the best interest of his own political party and campaign supporters.
And what about who's supporting and opposing him? So, by the looks of media coverage, representatives of Indigenous groups are claiming that a majority oppose, and Bolsonaro himself has recognized that he's going to face a lot of backlash from environmentalists, but in typical Bolsonaro style, he does not seem to care. So, is there any chance that this could be undone, or is it a sure thing that these lands are going to be opened up?
Well, the opposition to this bill is not only limited to indigenous activists or let's say NGOs. Even some of the traditional allies of Bolsonaro, such as the leader of the lower house, Rodrigo Maya, has as of today said that he would actually not bring the proposal to a vote at Congress. Although there's plenty of talks right now to try to convince him, so pressure on Rodrigo Maya to actually move forward with the Bolsonaro proposal. But my point here, and I'm trying to look at it from the perspective of mining companies and investors, is that the risks of potential backlash and especially reputational impact and risks on companies operating on those lands actually might outweigh the potential benefit of it. I mean, the question of deforestation of the Amazon, the question of indigenous rights in Brazil are issues that are extremely supported globally, international NGOs. Every time that we've seen, for example, even under the Temer administration, the fact that a specific protected area on the states of Amapa and Para would be open for exploration, he had to back up on this because of the importance of reputational and campaigns, both internationally and domestically. Here we're seeing a different approach, which is really a large scale legislation on the entire set of indigenous laws, and potentially, without, instead of potentially having priorities on some lands where you do not have communities that are completely secluded from industrial life, or you do not have a specific environmental, or you already have a start of deforestation, for example, which could have explained why you would want to specifically target those specific lands. We have Bolsonaro that decided to go with a large scale law and reforms that will, no matter what happens in the coming weeks, will unleash a series of antagonistic campaigns from communities, from political parties, not only on the left, even some on the center rights have voiced their opposition to it, and will then, potentially have very negative repercussion on any mining companies that think about engaging towards that path.
Okay, so Bolsonaro's basically taken the stance of go big or go home. And so looking at this land, and so you've touched on the reputational risk for companies that would be interested in going in there. So so say hypothetically a company does apply to go and work on land that does get opened up, if everything goes through, would they be starting from scratch? Do we actually know about the geology of these areas? Are they of interest to mining companies, or is it very much mostly coming from the agribusiness? Do they want new land for farming?
Well, it is coming from the agribusiness first. The kind of geological survey on lands that were not open for exploration obviously is extremely limited. There is the argument that you can actually, make, and is completely able to be supported, that it's actually still worth to actually go and do the exploration to know what is in there without, leading to a specific projects afterwards, or having a series of new steps, whether or not to support an eventual large scale exploration. So right now, in terms of knowledge of those lands and geological potential, is fairly limited. My issue, and the main issue that probably mining companies have in Brazil, is that the reputation of the mining sector in Brazil is catastrophic over the last few years. I mean, you had the São Marco Dam in 2015, the Brumadinho Dam, early last year, that burst and led to a series of fatalities in Minas Gerais. And at this point, this is potentially another very strongly antagonistic move from the Bolsonaro administration that kind of puts in jeopardy any kind of attempts from IBRAM, from the mining national agency, actually a new mining national agency, to try to improve the reputation of the mining sector. You do have some states that are still fairly strong and with strong potential for mining. Minas Gerais being one, Goiás being another one. A series of states actually have very strong and interesting project where you do have very sound operators and companies understanding how to approach communities, how to approach political actors and economic actors locally to get support to the development of such projects. But this very responsible way of operating a mine, unfortunately, is going to receive backlash from the kind of head-on position from Bolsonaro to take a decision against indigenous land that will have negative repercussion on the mining sector as a whole in Brazil.
Okay, and before we leave Brazil, I just wanted to check. So, what's your take on uh, Bolsonaro's popularity? So, he's been in for a while now, and he still seems to be going for these quite antagonistic positions. Does he have popular support? I mean, the next election is quite a long way away yet, but is it looking like Bolsonaro's won the people?
Well, you will have some local elections before the general elections, and that's at the end of this year. But the issue here in terms of politics in Brazil, it's a very partisan politics, in the sense that Bolsonaro plays the cards of falling on his electoral promises, of antagonizing the opposition, which is still right now the PT being seen, the Partido Trabalhadores from Lula and Dilma Rousseff, with still the strong force of opposition, but it has a terrible reputation in the vast, let's say, range of society. There's the absence of a center right movement, which is seen as widely corrupt. You had, when you look at the results of Alckmin, for example, during the latest election, that shows how the traditional center right parties have completely collapsed. And so you have a situation right now in Brazil, which is very Manichaean of Bolsonaro or the PT, and therefore the position from Bolsonaro, very quite similar to what Trump is doing in the US, is to content his electoral basis, hoping that people will still support him thanks to economic results, thanks to a series of development and good reforms that have been carried away by the very good economic minister in Brazil, Paulo Guedes, that has allowed a series of privatization and deregulation of sectors that was deeply needed. And Bolsonaro is hoping that these economic results would actually allow him to continue for a second term down the road. But the issue right now is in terms of short term and the impact that it will have on the mining sector. You have to be extremely vocal of the way that you actually develop your operation in Brazil, by showing how you do it, working with communities, working with local actors, building alliances with strong stakeholders on the economic sector or social sector, to be able to differentiate yourself from both a very present informal and illegal mining of the garimpeiros that is linked to money laundering activities and so on, and also the kind of exploration companies that would actually jump on this potential change of legislation and try to explore in indigenous communities and there be tackled by the reputational backlash. So it's very important that for responsible mining companies in Brazil, in states that are actually pro mining, you are very clear about how you operate and how you operate differently from a very antagonistic approach that is supported by Bolsonaro.
Okay, so then that's a lot on Brazil. Let's move over to another jurisdiction. So, Peru is a very popular mining jurisdiction. There's a lot of copper, there's a lot of gold, there's just a lot of mining there overall. They've recently held an election in the past 3 weeks, and the result is quite interesting. So the Congress was dissolved by the president Martin Vizcarra, And by the looks of it, with the results, his opposition, his primary opposition, has been completely obliterated. The party led by Kiko Fujimori has lost most of its seats. No party in Congress got more than 11% of votes. So it's a very, very divided looking Congress at the moment, very seemingly unorganized, coming from a part of the world where we're used to parties getting 30, 40%. So what can you tell me about what does this mean for mining in Peru? How is this result going to have an impact on what's happening there?
Well, in Peru, you had a situation where Martin Vizcarra was lacking legitimacy. I mean, if we just look back at the context, you give some very good information, but also you have to keep in mind that Vizcarra was never elected president. He was the vice president in Peru and had to take the job when the Kuczynski was forced to resign following allegation of taking bribes from the Odebrecht scandal. And so Vizcarra, who at the time was both VP and ambassador to Canada, had to return to Lima and assume the position of president. But he never received this kind of legitimate endorsement by the population through traditional elections. And that's why this move of dissolving the Congress, which is considered to be one of the main reasons for the fact that Peruvian politics have played by corruptions and played by inactions and populism. His move to dissolve the Congress has actually, extremely supported and received a lot of favorable support from the population. This election actually strengthened Vizcarra's position as president. We're looking at elections where the newly elected Congress member will only stay in Congress for 16 months because we will have new elections in 2022 in Peru. But end of 2021 in Peru. The what's important for the mining community is that now they have someone to talk to in Lima that has a stronger position, where the key party of opposition, which is the Fujimori party of Acción Popular, was actually completely, sorry, Fuerza Popular, sorry for that, was actually completely reduced the capacity to prevent reforms from the Vizcarra administration. And we're finally going to see potentially a Congress at work in Peru. And that is obviously a positive for mining operations. There is also a positive if you're looking at receiving the support from the Vizcarra administration towards specific mining projects and developments. Therefore, that voice from Vizcarra now would be much louder than it used to be because of the lack of legitimacy that he might have had prior to those elections. Now, needless to say, we still have some very strong structural issues in Peru. There are key projects, whether you're looking at Newmont's operated Conga or you're looking at Tia Maria, you're looking at Las Bombas from MMG. All those projects are either not even initiated, stalled, or seeing a series of blockades from populations and communities. And that shows, again, the fact that a jurisdiction such as Peru, you can only be successful in that jurisdiction if you actually work incrementally from the very get-go of the project with communities, and instead of showering communities with money and making strong promises that then only just lead to additional demands from communities, you need to be able to strike a strong strategy of engaging and working with communities as partners of the project. And we're seeing, at the same time as we're seeing still those mega projects stalled, we also see some other companies being able to really move forward in Peru, as the case of Hadbe Minerals, for example, that got the support from communities of Chiloroya on the Pampacancha copper deposit. You do have a series of other projects in gold, silver, copper that are able to move forward when some more sustainable practices and much more inclusive practices towards communities are put in place and implemented. And this is exactly the line that Vizcarra has supported throughout his administration, and that's where the larger companies that have their project being stalled need to understand that they have to integrate, especially in Las Bambas, for example, they have to integrate those very specific approach to communities and building alliances and support from neighboring populations to be able to move forward. It's possible to do in Peru, but you need to be serious about it because that's been number one on the agenda in Peru for almost half a decade.
Okay, and so Peru goes to an election again at the end of next year. Um, And so, just moving through them quickly now, we'll just touch on one more subject. So, there's been developments in Ecuador. A Chinese backed consortium, Equigold Mining, has initiated a dispute with the government over a project there. So, it's a gold project. Can you tell me a little bit about the situation there and what we can expect to see in the news?
Indeed, there was a strong decision from Ecuador Mining to engage into litigation against the Ecuadorian government over the incapacity to move forward on the Rio Blanco mine in southern Ecuador. This project that had, you know, initiated production in 2018 was almost immediately halted by the opposition of community and activists. And instead of potentially you know going back to the drawing board and trying to find a joint positions with some of those communities, and obviously you have to be very clear in your intelligence gathering to know with whom you could be working and getting seeking the support of the government. Equagold Mining has thrown the towel and decided to go to the road of international arbitration because they claim that the government do not support their legitimate right to engage into mining operations at Rio Blanco. Now, what you have to understand in Ecuador is that you have a very fluid situation right now. You have a president that has tried to implement a series of IMF-backed reform, especially on energy subsidies, and those has been met with strong demonstration, especially from the indigenous communities, and eventually Alain Moreno had to back off on this decision. You have different type of mining actors operating in Ecuador. You have fairly responsible Canadian actors, whether you're looking at Lundin Gold, especially that was able to produce the first ounce of gold at the site of Fruta del Norte, working with Shuar indigenous communities, receiving a series of United Nations prize for the capacity to engage with communities and move forward on a project. On the other side of the spectrum, you have a series of mining companies that have not yet integrated the necessity to actually work on value creation around the mining site, on gathering and understanding the requests, some of them legitimate from population, and therefore change their modes of operation, or at least develop the right type of CSR or engagement with communities policies. And those are, Equagold Mining is definitely one of them. The Mirador, extreme large mine, a copper mine in Ecuador, which is um, operated by a Chinese consortium after Ecuacoriente, originally Canadian company, had initiated the process, also has been faced with a series of backlash from the population. There was even a state of emergency in 2016. So what you're seeing here is really two roads towards how to operate in a very fluid and strongly let's say in jurisdiction and strongly inspired by community opposition and indigenous communities that are very strong. I mean, the Pachakutik party is one of the leading party in Ecuador. You have some very strong and active members of the anti-mining community. If you look at, what Yaku Guartembel was the governor of the province of Aswai that has blocked the the INV project of Loma Larga. You do have some very strong opponents that can be engaged with. There is a possibilities to talk with them. There are possibilities to try to see how mining can be this one sector that brings development in remote areas that can actually, mitigate the risk, especially to water resources, water resource, or worries from communities. But then you have therefore companies such as Ecogold Mining or such as Mirador that actually, instead of engaging at the local level, decide to just go towards the highway with international arbitration and claims for they're claiming the demand for $500 million of arbitration compensation, which is an enormous sum for Ecuador, and this is obviously not a constructive approach from Ecuador Mining. Instead of this, you had a recent change of ministers in the Ministry of Mine in Ecuador, and the new minister understand the needs to actually engage with anti-mining groups and try to diffuse and build a case on the positive aspects of mining, but those are being blown away by, unfortunately, irresponsible position from such mining companies such as Ecuador Mining on this one.
So it would be fair to say that going for the nuclear option is going to hurt Ecogold mining in Ecuador.
I mean, if the deal from Equitable Mining is to just get a convince an arbitration chamber for a large check and then leave the country, then it's a strategy that can pay. But if you're serious about trying to actually engage in the production in a reserve, the Rio Blanco potential is actually fairly high. Then just engaging against the government and asking them for more policing or stronger actions against communities. We've seen that recipe for disaster already with Mirador in 2016 and state of emergency. And it's not because you're going to get a potential support from the government and mainly forced support from the government because of almost litigations and strong actions that this will allow you to actually operate your mine. There's no other way today, and that's what we've seen in all jurisdictions, not only Latin America and Africa, in Europe and so on. There's no other way than to actually engage constructively with communities and try to engage them as partners of projects, being accepted and explaining what could be the positive externalities of mining projects on issues of sustainability, whether you're looking at social development, economic development, and mitigation of environmental risks. And obviously, this is not the strategy that Equal Mining is adopting today.
And that was Remi Piet, Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. I'm Scott Tibbles with the Investing News Network. You can find us at investingnews.com and feel free to follow us at Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.